You know you tune into the Four Boxes Diner to be the smartest person in the room. And to do that, sometimes we have to basically talk to Second Amendment organizations and the Second Amendment movement, pointing out things that maybe they could be doing better, even if doing so is frankly against the grain a little bit. And I want to talk more strategically, more seriously about this floated proposal, which is not even a floated proposal. It's basically an inchoate, leaked, anonymous comment about transgenders and guns that came out of supposedly the Trump White House. We need to break this down and think about this a little bit more seriously, because I think there's a little bit of sloppy reasoning and sloppy rhetoric out there on behalf of our friends in the Second Amendment community, who I'm not going to name by name, but I'm just saying we need to be a little bit more strategic and think harder about these questions to make sure we're not only the smartest person in the room, but we win for our right to keep and bear arms. Let's break it down and get ready for some geeky inside stuff when we come right back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and I'm proud to say the top voice of the Second Amendment in America. Thank you, 2025 Gundies Awards. All right, folks, so to begin with, obviously I'm in a suit because it's Fox News weekend. Been talking a lot about Biden, the auto pen, and some other issues, of course. So therefore, I'm dressed up in a suit. I'm not competing with William Kirk for being the best-looking, most dapper person in the Second Amendment, but I am wearing a suit today nonetheless. With that said, I want to have a serious talk about this transgender issue associated with the Second Amendment. Obviously, I have no desire and I will not support new gun control laws, period, full stop. You all know that. But I want to be a little bit smarter dealing with this transgender and gun issue, because I think there may be some missed opportunities right now that we can still take advantage of to advance our right to keep and bear arms, to advance protections associated with our right to keep and bear arms. And it's possible there's an opportunity being missed here because we in the Second Amendment community are just too knee-jerk reaction just to say any gun restriction is a problem, which is generally my knee-jerk reaction too. But sometimes we have to think through the issue a little bit more carefully and look at the big picture. So here is the big picture as I see it, and then we're going to get down into the legal geeky details of this. Here's the big picture. To start with, we in the Second Amendment community, and I think in the Republican community, the conservative community, the libertarian community, we do not want firearms or any deadly weapon to be in the hands of at least two categories of people. And this should be generally an agreement among all of us across the board. The first category are violent criminal thugs and terrorists. People that go out and violently engage in crimes, whether it be with a gun or another deadly weapon. We want these people locked up. In the concept of ordered liberty, which is what we have in the United States, which is we have freedoms and liberties, but there are some constraints associated with a civil society and a rule of law, right? There's certain things we cannot do willy-nilly, right? And part of it is, if people are outright engaging in violent thuggery, they should be locked up and or sentenced to death. That's basic rules, and I think almost everyone watching this channel would agree. If someone violently engages in an evil crime of murder, rape, or robbery, or something like this, they should be locked up. And that is very important because not only are they off our streets so they cannot do it again, it's also appropriate punishment for people that misbehave like that. The second category that's like this are those people who are mentally ill to the point where they are physically violent, dangerous to themselves or to somebody else. Now, what that constitutes is an individualized determination, and we're going to get to that in a moment. Okay, we're going to break this down in more detail in a moment. But before we get there, I want to get some big picture concepts. One is we don't want violent criminals on our streets. If you're too dangerous to be on the street with a gun, you're too dangerous to be on the street as a general matter if you're a violent thuggery criminal. Likewise, if you are seriously mentally disturbed, and there are people out there, psychosis is a real mental disease. If you're a psycho, you have a mental disease that makes you a violent danger to yourself or to others, your Hannibal Lecter, your Michael Myers in the Halloween movies, whatever it is, there's something wrong with a person that makes them mentally ill to the point where they go out and do violent, disgusting things to others. We don't want them walking our streets either. Because, frankly, it's terrible for the things they do and the victims that have to suffer through what they do to them. So that alone justifies putting them away, locking them up in a mental institution and the like. But beyond all of this, in the Second Amendment community, what our greatest danger is, and never forget this, as we discuss this issue of transgenders and guns, the single greatest danger that we have in the Second Amendment community, bar none, is when either these wackadoodle criminals, terrorists, go out and misuse firearms and shoot a lot of people, or one of these psychopathic nut jobs goes out there, has delusions, whatever they have, they're schizophrenics, they're whatever it is, they have some mental disorder, they're on medications for mental disorders, whatever it is, and they go out there and shoot up a school. It is when these terrible events occur, this is the highest likelihood, the greatest risk to our community, that there will be an appeal to emotion and gun control laws will be pushed through. We see this all across the world. You have one nut job in Australia or one nut job in New Zealand or one nut job in the UK does something terrible because they're mentally ill and they're psychotic and they shoot up a school or they kill a bunch of people, whatever it is they do. And the next thing you know, ordinary law-abiding citizens of that country lose their right to keep and bear arms. They lose their guns. So we in the Second Amendment community should want criminals locked up, violent criminals locked up, and we want people that are mentally ill and dangerous locked up in appropriate mental institutions as well, which is part of why Donald Trump is talking about a few months ago bringing back mental institutions. Now, with that said, let's talk specifically about the transgender community. Now, I'm not going to be an expert on the transgender community and all the psychological issues associated with this or whatnot, but I'm going to say there's two general things to keep in mind as you talk about transgenders and any other group that may have mental diseases. Schizophrenia, bipolar, doesn't matter, whatever it is, psychosis, doesn't matter. There are strong arguments historically, and I think this was generally understood up until a few decades ago, that those people that had gender dysphoria, they thought they were a woman when they were really a biological man and vice versa. This was viewed as a mental disorder. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're violently dangerous, but it does mean that sort of step one of assessing a person is that there's a mental distress here. There's some sort of mental disorder going on here. So that alone gives rise to questions whether or not this person's dangerous. They have a mental issue, but that doesn't mean they're dangerous, but it could mean they're dangerous. Something to look into, something to consider. But then, this is very important to understand, this is an issue that probably we have to look into a lot more, and there's problems with finding out this information, and that's this. When these people have these mental illness diagnoses, they were diagnosed with gender dysphoria, with psychosis, with schizophrenia, they have delusions, they hallucinate, whatever it is. One of the frequent things that occurs with treatment, listen carefully, folks, is that psychiatrists, who are medical doctors with the ability to prescribe these psychotropic drugs, they prescribe these drugs to these individuals who are having mental issues, whatever it may be. They're manic, they're depressive, it doesn't matter, whatever it is. So now you have a person that has sort of got mental distress, mental issues, and you give them a whole bunch of psychotropic or other drugs. And it is pretty clear, I believe, for example, the Columbine shooters were both on these kinds of drugs, as I recall. And there's a lot of other people on these kinds of drugs. So for example, if you're a woman, a young lady who thinks you want to be a man or believes you're a man, and you start taking testosterone shots and taking all this testosterone and flooding your young female biological body with testosterone, is that a good thing? I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but it does seem to me to raise questions about whether or not that's good for you mentally. And maybe that's going to cause you to become a danger to yourself or to others. A lot of these people have various kind of hallucinations and whatnot. So with this said, I think what the Trump administration is trying to do is flagging the fact that you have a disproportionate number of these terrible mass shootings in recent memory are arising from the transgender community. And maybe it's because they're transgender and have gender dysphoria in and of itself, or maybe it's because of the drugs that are administered to these individuals. But whatever it is, there is concern that certain individuals, and this is key, and this is where I think the Second Amendment community has been a little sloppy, in my opinion, on this issue. And we're going to talk about why I think it is a missed opportunity if we don't play our cards right in just a moment. The reason why I've said that certain people in the Second Amendment community are being a little sloppy on this issue is that the Trump administration is not going to come out and say that all transgenders cannot have guns. That's not going to happen. Okay, it's simply not going to happen. What may happen, and we may want to consider supporting, we'll get to that in a second, is if someone has been diagnosed with a serious mental illness, and that could include gender dysphoria, it could include schizophrenia, it could include bipolar disorder, it could include psychosis, whatever it is, and there's a risk that they're dangerous, there needs to be further discussion of whether or not there should be an attempt to have an adjudication, a evidentiary hearing in front of a court with a neutral judge as to whether or not these people are a danger to themselves or to others. Because remember, for the last several decades, a lot of these people with mental illnesses have been diagnosed as being just sort of normal. There's not a big deal with this. And that has given rise to, among other things, a rise in homelessness, a rise in crazy people on our streets that do terrible things to people on the streets. So rather than being in like a mental institution, safe and sound, protecting themselves from people from themselves and from others, they're out on the street as homeless people. So it's not just the transgender issue that's at issue here. It's the mental health issue and the drugs administered to these people that have mental distress. And whether or not this makes them violently dangerous to others. Because again, this is the the group of people that are the greatest danger to our Second Amendment rights, because when they go out and do crazy, stupid stuff with guns, it comes back on us because people want to take away our rights. So I think what's happening here is the Trump administration says we need to have a serious conversation about mental illness and mental institutions and the connection to dangerousness. Now, constitutionally, let me be clear. There is no problem as a matter of constitutional law under the Second Amendment or otherwise that if someone after a court hearing with evidence, due process rights, protective lawyers, expert witnesses, you have a full-blown evidentiary hearing, you have a full-blown trial, we're presenting evidence on both sides, and someone is found by a neutral judge beyond a clear and convincing evidence standard that they are indeed mentally ill and they are also deemed to be a danger to themselves or to others. This goes back to the beginning of our country. They can be put in prison if they've committed a crime, right? Criminals have been around forever. You can put criminals in prison. There's no debate about that. Likewise, if you're mentally ill and a danger to yourself, you can be put into an institution or otherwise locked up and have your freedoms taken away. At the time of the founding, these people were either referred to as idiots, which means people that were not smart, or they were called lunatics, which were people that were mentally ill and violent. So even at the time of the founding, you had people that had mental disorders that could be locked up in a sense, have their freedom taken away and disarmed because of mental issues. You had the criminal category, but then you also have the mental ill category. And what Donald Trump wants to talk about, and I think it's a fair question, is what are we going to do about these people? Remember, under federal law right now, you don't have to change anything. Under 18 U.S.C. 922 G4, if you've been adjudicated, hear what I just said, adjudicated, which means there's a trial, a finding of fact, and something you can appeal from. If you've been adjudicated a mental defective, or you've been adjudicated and you've been civilly committed involuntarily because you've been found by a court to be of mentally ill and a violent physical danger to others or to yourself, right now, you can be disarmed. And the Supreme Court is not going to say that people who are been found by a court of law to be a danger to themselves or to others cannot be disarmed. They're going to find that. They already found it in Rahimi. But remember, Rahimi says specifically, it all turns on a finding of dangerousness. And Mr. Rahimi in that case admitted to being a violent danger. He admitted it. So that's key. Now, with that said, where is the missed opportunity potentially being missed on the part of the Second Amendment community? There's 3 points I want to make about this. Number one, there is a history when an issue gets, you can have the liberals and the conservatives line up together to fight a law or a concept. For example, the McCain-Feingold anti-First Amendment campaign finance law was challenged in court and ultimately, at the end of the day, successfully overturned thanks to cooperation between the National Rifle Association, the NRA, and the ACLU and other liberal groups. So you had liberals and conservatives fighting the fight to protect our First Amendment rights in the context of campaign finance. So it's possible in the context of transgender and guns that we in the Second Amendment community have the perfect opportunity to make common cause with left-wing groups and anti-gun groups and people that would otherwise hate guns on two critical legal issues that we want to win, not just in the courts, not just in the Supreme Court, but in the American psyche, the Overton window, if you will, the culture of America. The first one is that every single American has the right to keep and bear arms to protect themselves, because already we see the trans community and the people that support the trans community coming out and arguing that this is a group that needs guns more than any other group because they're victimized, and therefore they need guns to protect themselves. Again, helping the Overton window open up for the right to keep and bear arms on behalf of the lefties. That's what we want people saying all across America, all political stripes, that guns save lives. And now we have left-wing groups are starting to say that. We want to encourage that. Number two, in addition to reaffirming the right to keep and bear arms, number two, we want to make it clear, and this is a very important issue, we want to make it clear that no one, whether you're a MAGA supporter, you got gender dysphoria, you're white, you're black, you're a man, you're a woman, it doesn't matter. Nobody can be disarmed unless there's first and foremost robust due process protections of the sort of thing we see in the civil commitment process already for the last many decades, which means you are entitled to lawyers. If you can't afford a lawyer, you get one paid for. The standard is clear and convincing before you can be disarmed or otherwise civilly committed. The burden of proof is on the government to show that you're a danger. The burden of proof is on the government to show you're mentally ill. And if there's any doubt, the government loses and the right to keep and bear arms wins. We have an opportunity, folks, if we play our cards right, and I think the Trump administration may be aware of this, to get the anti-gun movement, the left wing in America, to come out and vociferously argue in favor of the right to keep and bear arms and the importance of guns for self-defense, and to vocally support the importance of individualized determinations that Bob is a problem and is danger, Jill is a problem and a danger, not a global en masse sort of thing, but an individualized determination in a particular adjudication after a hearing and full-blown due process and a finding of fact that goes beyond the clear and convincing standard, and only then may they be disarmed. This is an opportunity for we in the 2A community to potentially work with left-wing groups to get the courts to go along and set precedent in favor of the right to keep and bear arms, because the people suing or arguing in favor of the right to keep and bear arms are not members of the NRA, members of the Second Amendment Foundation, Gun Owners of America, and all that, or supporters of the Four Boxes Diner channel, potentially. They're members of the left-wing establishment suing to defend the right to keep and bear arms and suing and trying to vindicate due process protections associated with the right to keep and bear arms. Do you see what I'm saying? Just like the McCain-Feingold law created an opportunity for the left and the right to come together to make common cause to vindicate and expand our First Amendment rights to free speech, there may be opportunities here to work with the left to expand our Second Amendment rights, not just the existence of them and the scope of them, but also the due process protections that we want in place to protect them now and going forward. So before I wrap up, I want to prove that I'm right on one thing. Here's an example of the Director of Communications for the Human Rights Campaign coming out in support of the Second Amendment on behalf of the trans community. Here's what she had to say. Laura Powell, Director of Communications at the Human Rights Campaign, told ABC News in a statement, "The Constitution is not a privilege reserved for a few. It guarantees basic rights to all. Transgender people are your neighbors, classmates, family members, and friends, and we deserve the full protection of our nation's laws, not anti-American nonsense from the White House. If rights can be stripped from one group simply because of who they are, they can be stripped from anyone." Exactly right, folks. See, we have somebody from the Human Rights Committee on the left side of the political spectrum arguing in favor of the Constitution, the right to protect individualized determinations, and the like. There may be an opportunity here to make common cause with the left and get very strong legal protections in place for the Second Amendment, just like we've done before in other contexts. So again, I don't have all the answers for laying out the strategy in this particular video today. All I'm saying is, for you Second Amendment organizations out there, for you friends out there in the Second Amendment community, for those out there on the internet, I want you to be very sharp, very smart, think through this carefully and strategically, and don't just knee-jerk reaction stuff. And I'm not saying anybody has, it's just a word of the wise here. So again, all I'm saying is, let's give this a little bit more thought before we knee-jerk reaction on any of these things. The good news is the Trump White House has no specific proposal. We're not even sure any of this is true. This is all anonymous reporting. So maybe it is, maybe it isn't. We don't know. But this is not an issue we should simply kick to the curb and ignore. We should maybe think through this a little bit more, because there may be some great opportunities here to win for the Second Amendment and to make you the smartest person in the room and to elevate your game above shall not be infringed. You tune to the Four Boxes Diner for a reason. And this is one of the reasons and one of the moments in time where maybe we can work together to win for our rights. You know, as they say, politics makes for strange bedfellows. All right, folks, so there you have it. Make sure you follow me on X at 4boxes9. Don't forget to subscribe both to YouTube and to Rumble. I look forward to talking again real soon here at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.